Welcome to Healing Lives with Corey Gilbert, a podcast sponsored by the Healing Lives Center. Discover how to love and lead your family well and biblically. God created sex, marriage, and the family for our stewardship, growth, and benefit. My heart and passion is to teach, train, educate, and disciple Christians that want strong marriages and families. The Healing Lives Center has been serving Christians since the year 2000. Its mission is to be a center for sex, trauma, and marriage education and transformation, where we offer counseling, coaching, courses, and speaking services to you, your church, or ministry. Check us out at healinglives.com. Welcome. Looking forward to our conversation today with Derek and Amy Weichel. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We're excited to be here. Thank you very much.
This is a very important conversation, one that's really focusing on your family, and looking forward to the resources that the Weichel family has and what their journey. So tell us a little bit about how you got here, and your book and your family.
Sure. So yeah, our story has a kind of a couple of points that helped get us to where we are. Several years ago, when our kids were still young, we actually had a family friend who was a teenager who died suddenly, and that started getting us thinking, hey, we don't know how much time we have with our kids, and especially from a spiritual standpoint, are we doing what we can to make sure that we're keeping our kids focused on Jesus? And then as our kids got older, we started seeing some of the statistics out there. 60 to 70% of kids will leave the church, even if they're going to church on a regular basis, going to a Christian school, going to Sunday school. None of those are bad things, but still, even with those influences, kids are still leaving the church. So that was another thing that prompted us to think, hey, what can we be doing as parents to maybe help change that trajectory for our family life?
Love that.
And then finally, the third thing was that we have a coach, and we were talking to him one day, and he talking to him about some parenting ideas. I mean, he asked us, well, what's your plan for parenting? And that's when we looked at ourselves and we're like, wow, God entrusted us with these 4 children. And we really aren't being very intentional about raising them, just from a general parenting standpoint, but more specifically from a spiritual standpoint. So then that prompted us to start doing some research to say, okay, well, how can we come up with our own intentional parenting plan that will not only help us, from a general parenting standpoint, but also from that spiritual standpoint? We started doing some research and couldn't really find many resources that were going to help us with that. So we went through this process on our own. And while going through that process, we kind of developed the framework that we followed. Once we got our plan in place, and we saw many benefits, many blessings to having this plan set up for our family life, and especially from a spiritual standpoint, helped us be a lot more intentional from that aspect of it. And we thought, wow, this has been really a blessing for our family. Maybe this is something that could help other families as well. And then that's kind of eventually what led to us writing our book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think people started noticing that things were a little bit different for us, and maybe kind of like, hey, what you guys are different. And then we kind of said, well, how did we get to this place, and of being like more connected and just more focused on Jesus for our family. And so we thought maybe they would like to go through that process too. So
nice.
So we came up with the framework.
Nice. Yeah, and we'll get into the framework here in a little bit, because I really love your framework. I think it's very practical and very intentional. You're right. I think most families, it's survival. It's whatever the demands are. We kind of go through few filters, but do I say yes? It's almost like we look around at others. If they're saying yes, we say yes. Yeah. So how do we intentionally lead our family in terms of commitments? But the scary one is the stat on how many walk away from the church when they graduate.
Right. Yeah. That really got our attention when we started seeing those statistics, and we were doing exactly what you said. Especially when we have 4 kids, and at one point they were ages 5 and under, so we were in survival mode. Just trying to keep the kids alive from day to day, much less think about, well, is this the best way to be doing things? And then, as they grew older and we started seeing those stats, we thought we were doing the right things by sending them to a Christian school, taking them to church, Sunday school. And again, I don't want to say those are bad things, but in and of themselves, you can't delegate all of that teaching to others. You need to, the statistics show the most important thing is the parents' influence on the children's spiritual development. And again, not just outsourcing it, but actually intentionally teaching it and talking about it in the home.
Yeah. And then using those things as more of a resource and like a complementary, not just delegating it. Oh, church, and we go to church, check that box off. But, that's like part of your whole plan.
I know we saw a difference. Our kids were doing community Bible study with my wife. So they would go get this like semester long intense dive into Revelation or the book of John or something like that you don't get almost anywhere except seminary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then they decided, hey, we want to go to Awana. Our friends are going to Awana. We're like, sure, go. We're not going to make you do anything. It was actually kind of cool to see peer pressure there, make them do stuff. We didn't have to, because the foundation was very much a deeper dive in a book study. We almost think kids can't handle that, and I strongly disagree.
Right. Yeah, I agree. That's what we found with our kids too, especially, even from that spiritual standpoint, is they're capable of a lot more than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
When you push them, they can really show that they can study, memorize a lot more than you think they can. So, yeah.
So then what were some of the things others were seeing that was different about you? Like, what was different about your family?
Yeah, I think some of it was just that we were more connected. We're having more fun together. They kind of like asked me, well, don't you guys go through some of the problems we do? And I said, well, yeah, but we just kind of have more of a plan for it, I guess. I mean,
nice.
And we kind of intentionally thought of things beforehand too. Like even like with our discipline, I'm really reactive. So having like more of a thought out plan before jumping in helps me to just, instead of be reactive, I jump into like, okay, this is what we talked about before, so this is what we do now. And that's something that the kids have been included with too. And so I think people have noticed that and asked me about that before.
Well, that's two big things. The fact that you recognize your own areas that need work, so the reactivity, but then creating a plan it's prepping, being intentional ahead of time. We're going to have struggles. We're going to have battles of the will, and they're probably going to win.
So.
I think one of the big benefits too, from my standpoint and Amy's, is it just helps to take that emotion out of it. Because I think if you get into a conflict and you let your emotion take over, usually things don't turn out very well. But if you think about it beforehand, okay, well, if we get into this situation, this is me and the kids know that this is what's going to happen. This is the consequence. Helps to take that emotion out of it. And I mean, there's still going to be some situations you might not have thought through or might not have prepared for. And in those situations too, I think it's important to say, okay, well, we're just going to step back for a minute. We're not going to, let our emotions take over. We'll talk about this later after you've had a chance to sit down and develop a plan for how you're going to handle it.
Yeah, we definitely don't do it perfectly, but this just really gives us like more direction so that we can do it better more often.
And the kids are all the same, right? They're all exactly the same.
Not quite. They're all a little bit different. Quite different, some of them.
Yeah, I've got one that him and I just butt heads like crazy. And it's like, oh gosh, even my wife would look at me like, Corey, stop it. Because the emotions get in. And, terrible. Yeah. Well, let's look at your plan. What are the steps that you kind of came up with that are really the meat there of do this?
Yeah. So we'll kind of go over just the big picture overview. And then if there's certain aspects we want to kind of dig into a little more, we can. Okay. But generally what we did and what we advise other parents to do too, is just start by looking at their family's strengths, weaknesses, and their culture. I think like you were just alluding to with children, every family is different too. So you need to say, okay, well, what are our strengths? What are we good at? What are our weaknesses? What are we not good at? And what does our culture look like? Once you got that established, then we've got what we call 7 simple steps to help you better steward your family life. And so there's the acronym that.
I love that. That steward is the acronym. That is such a critical word. I love that.
Yep. So exactly. So the steward's the acronym. The S stands for seek God. So first, we don't want to look at what God wants us to do as parents. The T stands for target or trajectory, and that's just basically making sure your family's all on the same page with where you want to go as a family. And Amy and I, before we did this, we found that we weren't always on the same page as far as what we wanted for our kids.
So
this really helped us focus in what we want together for our family.
Love that.
And then the E is for explore your options. Like we mentioned before, just because your friends are doing it one way doesn't mean that's the best thing for your family. Or just because your parents did it one way, that doesn't mean they did it wrong, but it's your family's different than how you were raised. So look at your different options for parenting. The W stands for write it down. So once you've had a chance to look at these different options, take time to write down, okay, what is our plan for these different aspects of our parenting? And the most important one we think from that one is your spiritual plan, to have a spiritual family growth plan for your family. And the next one is A is for action. So we provide some tips to help them put this plan into action. The R is for review or revise, because obviously your family is going to change over time. You'll learn new things. Some things you have tried aren't going to be working. So you just need to have a plan. How often are we going to go back and look at this and make changes as needed? And then finally, the D is for direct others. We say, once you're on a good path and you're a parenting journey, then you should go help others who may be struggling on theirs and help them with some resources that might have worked well for you.
That's so great. Yeah. And the other thing you mentioned earlier, which to me fits in with this really well, is you're partnering with your kids. This isn't like a top-down only. You're still the parents, but in conversation with them, including them in some of the decisions, makes the buy-in totally different than when they're just told, especially as they get older.
Yeah, I think that especially from our standpoint, that came into play when we were doing the T aspect, target or trajectory. Part of that is setting up your family's vision and values.
Yes.
And we had the kids involved with that whole process. Our youngest was pretty young when we were doing it. So we didn't necessarily have her write out what she thought our visions or values should be, but she would draw pictures and then kind of tell us, here's what I think is important. And like you said, her influence maybe wasn't as strong as our influence, but everyone was at the table, everyone was participating, and everyone had a vote. And
voted on which ones we wanted to include in our family values.
Well, and then even the youngest one, though, is seeing a process that imprints on them in a way we can't even comprehend. And as they grow up, we don't realize how much even the younger ones who may have less to say, or a ton to say, but not relevant. But and that's kind of a neat thing of even just the family dynamics of birth order, and you have older kids and younger kids, and to me that's such a neat practical thing. We bring a whiteboard into our dining room sometimes, or a paper flip chart.
Yep.
We'll write stuff out, and especially when there's a season of, okay, we need a pivot here. Like a few years ago with COVID stuff. We homeschool, so that was less of an issue, but that to be intentional through seasons, through health issues, through struggles, financial changes as a family.
I agree. I think that's so important to get the kids involved. And even from a discipline standpoint, if something new comes up that we don't have a plan for, usually the way we'll do it is first Amy and I will discuss it, and then we'll kind of take it to the kids, and we'd be like, hey, here's the issue. Here's what here's why we are concerned about this. And if this happens again, then here's what our planned consequence is. So that they're aware of it too, so that everyone's on the same page. And if this issue happens in the future, it's not, we don't have to get emotional about it. We've got a plan, and the kids already know what's going to happen too. So it makes it easier for everyone, I think, that way.
Yeah. And they know what to expect too. They know what they're getting themselves into if they do it.
Yes.
And then they generally, because kids like to test the boundaries, at least some more than others, in our experience at least, they'll try it a couple of times. So you just have to be consistent with it too. And that also helps to have it written down and have the plan and thought out, and they know it's going to come each time. But that's how, at least one of our kids, that's how she feels loved, I think, is just to know that we are there. And we mean what we say, and we're going to hold our boundaries. And because then she'll give us the biggest hug after the consequence. She's that's how she feels loved. So we follow with that.
I know one of our, so how old are your kids, by the way, right now?
The oldest is 13, and then we have 11, 9, and 8.
Yeah. Ooh, yes.
Yeah.
Our youngest is 13 and our oldest is 17. And
Okay.
so now with a driver, a whole new world.
Yeah.
And we live in Oregon and the police don't tend to pull anyone over, it seems like. And he speeds like crazy. So Life 360 is awesome. And we keep getting these like 81 miles an hour alerts. And it's like, oh. So what do we do? My wife reacted at first and just yanked $100 out of his bank account. Because he has a job. And so now we've moved it to 25. But every single time he speeds, though he goes over, and we live in an area, there's nothing over 60. So whenever he goes over, she pulls 25 out and tells him. It's like, and he's slowed down.
Yeah.
The police aren't going to do it. We have to. Yeah. Those kind of, and that's, I call my kids my experiments. It's literally day by day as they grow up, an experiment of we don't know what is the new thing with the new struggle, the new temptation, the new, and it's for some of us, it's stuff we never dealt with, or we never dealt with it in that way.
Yeah.
So that's to me the partnering with our kids to go, hey, let's talk about why this isn't acceptable or appropriate. And hey, what would you do if this was your kid? Even though that's a funny question.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and I think another way to look at that too is if they've got younger siblings, to say, okay, well, how would you want your younger sibling to react or behave or treat this situation? And that kind of, obviously, if they don't have kids, that at least gets them to think a little bit more from that standpoint of, okay, well, I've got to be a good role model for my siblings as well. But yeah, every situation, like you said, there's going to be a lot of new situations that parents come into, and I think that's why it's important to have some sort of a framework in place. And yeah, if there is a new situation that comes up, exactly like you were saying, don't just react and say, no, we're not going to do that, but actually take the time to sit down, have a conversation, say, well, why do you want this, new technology or this new app or whatever the new thing is? And then, make sure they understand what your concerns are. And then, it's not necessarily a negotiation, but just try to maybe come up with a more rational plan for, hey, we could try this, but if you go past these boundaries, then this is the consequence. So you're not, always just saying no, no, no all the time, but you have a plan to maybe let them try some of the things that they want to try.
Yeah, especially as they're getting older and wanting to be more independent, and they should be more independent, but still giving them some boundaries and guidelines and bringing them into that conversation too, rather than just dictating no or yes.
Right. And as they get older, especially teenage years, which can be hard, that doesn't have to be, but we've got to be able to move those boundaries out slowly and then launch. I've seen so many families where they're tight, 18. All right, bye. And then, of course, they crash and burn. And of course, they go off the deep end. And of course, they try everything because they were not allowed to. But then the other extreme is, well, you're 12. I guess you're an adult. No.
Not that either.
So partnering with our kids. I love the way that you're focused on the parents and on the family. Because you're right. Go to church every single time the door's open. Christian school. You've got all these good inputs. Youth group. But it's actually not enough because it comes back to what happens in the home deeply shapes their future. Now, what I've seen is families who've been intentional in the home, intentional with all these other things, but it's also what they allow in their home has been the negative, as in online peers, honestly, is the main one. These online influences that have taken our kids away and taught ideologies and twisted where they don't even know what's up or down. So
that's another whole level. You think everything's in the home, but there's all these outside influences that can so easily come in, and that's why it's important to have like those conversations too, about like what are our family values, what is our family culture, and then always go back to scripture and say this is the ultimate authority too.
Correct. Yeah. And if we model that as well, that we go back to scripture, they are at least getting that. I found many parents, because the area I teach in is gender and sexuality. I think many parents who will say, oh, but I've told my kids that they can always come to me. And it's like,
Mhm.
They're not going to. There's a
Yeah.
few that might, but most will not. Because when
Yeah.
shame enters the picture, I shut down, I pull away, I run away.
Yeah.
That's the way Satan works. So we must be proactive at setting the boundaries, checking in on our kids, being intentional. I think that's a critical. You're basically putting a heavier burden, I think, on mom and dad, which is the way
Mhm.
it's meant to be.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your book, it's a book too. The Steward acronym that you had. This is in a book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
where
so
can people get that?
yeah.
Hey, a chance to change. Okay.
So yeah, it's available on Amazon. You can buy, I mean, there's an ebook version, paperback version, and even an audiobook version out
Nice.
now. But yeah, I think the main thing with that book is it goes it's designed for parents who are like, hey, things are going okay, but I know something's missing. I want to be doing, they see that, hey, our family is not where we want it to be. They see some of those statistics that, hey, even if I send my kids to church or Sunday school, that there's still that fairly decent chance that, they might start to leave the church over time. And what can I be doing as a parent to really do almost everything I can be doing? Obviously, no parents are perfect, but what doing almost everything I can be doing to keep my children and my family focused on Jesus for this and future generations. So, for those parents, we wrote this book. It kind of goes through that framework. It's written as a fictional book, which makes it easy to read. It's non-judgmental.
Yeah.
It doesn't, provide a specific, it's not prescriptive. It tells parents, here's exactly what you should do, but it kind of leaves it open to them to figure out what's going to work best for their family. And even if you're not taking every single step, which could be overwhelming for some families, I think there's a lot of small ideas or lessons they could take from this book that would just help them get one step closer to that.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and we heard some people say it's really relatable. They can put themselves and their family in the situation. And somebody said, like, oh, my son just went off to college and this just spoke to me,
Nice.
because that's what happened in the book. So I think, we wrote it so that it would be relatable and encouraging, and maybe give you something to think about, maybe something that you never thought of before that you could do with your kids. And even if it's just one, like Derek said, like a couple small little things, they're going to make a huge difference in the long run. Even just, a few little things here and there. So yeah, we wrote it for families. So
love it. And we need that. We need more and more good resources, biblical resources, Christ-centered, that are leading family, because the voices are loud right now, leading families away, leading families towards a much more self-centered existence.
Yeah. And it can be challenging for parents too, just because there's so many things going on in this world to get distracted by, just to try to really keep your focus on Jesus. And how do I do that? It's not an easy thing to do. Yeah.
Well, it's good talking to you guys, and it's good meeting you. And Amy and Derek Weichel, thank you so much for coming on. And if you want to access that book, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, other places, but also on their website, which is faithfulparent.org. I love that website. That's a good name, faithfulparent.org. You can get the book there, and there's other resources. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yep, thanks for having us.
thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the Healing Lives with Corey Gilbert podcast. It has been an honor to serve. If you are struggling, have questions, or in need, Dr. Gilbert offers a free consultation for new clients. Check us out at healinglives.com to book a call. If this has been helpful to you, please share it, leave a review, and help us get the word out so that we can see lives changed, marriages transformed, and more people come into a life-changing relationship with Jesus Christ. The Healing Lives Center offers online courses, programs, books, intensives, and other services to help you live biblically and well. Discover more resources on YouTube and in Dr. Gilbert's Healing Marriage Facebook group, The Healing Marriage.